So welcome, everyone. There are 98 days until the election. And so now is the time to request your absentee ballot. Please don't wait. After this event, there'll be one-on-one voter help if you need help on Zoom. And I'll put the link in the chat for both the link to vote from abroad and also for the voter help. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jen.
Thanks, Angela. And welcome, everyone, and welcome, Tim. As always, it was a great pleasure to hear your talk in person a few weeks ago at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Well, in the past, you've graciously spoken to our Democrats Abroad Austria members in person. I really appreciated your desire this time to address a broader audience in this critical election year. The announcement was followed by, as you can see, hundreds of RSVPs from countries across the globe. So I'm sure I'm not alone in thanking you for taking your time to speak to us today. After Professor Snyder's talk, we will take questions from the audience and a few prepared questions from the panelists. So please keep your questions succinct so that we can get through as many as time allows. And please type your questions into the question and answer Q&A chat box. And with that, I'd like to introduce our international chair, Martha McDevitt-Pugh.
Thanks so much, Jen. And thanks, Angela and Jen and all the others for organizing this really exciting webinar today. Glad to be here. I'm a California voter in the Netherlands, and it's my pleasure to introduce Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder is a Richard C. Levin Professor of History and Global Affairs at Yale University and a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. A scholar of the history of Central and Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, and the Holocaust, Snyder speaks 5 and reads 10 European languages and has written 16 books and co-edited 2. Timothy Snyder's work has appeared in 40 languages and received about as many prizes. It has inspired political demonstrations, sculpture, posters, punk rock, rap, film, theater, and opera, and earned him 6 state orders and decorations from Austria, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland, as well as 4 honorary doctorates. Snyder writes and speaks in the international press on Ukraine, American politics, strategies for averting authoritarianism, digital politics, health and education, and he has appeared in media around the world, including major films and as an expert witness to Congress. He's written several books, including Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin, On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, and The Road to Unfreedom and Our Malady. Both The Road to Unfreedom, Russia, Europe, America, and On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century were New York Times bestsellers. His upcoming book, On Freedom, to quote, is a brilliant exploration of freedom, what it is, how it's been misunderstood, and why it's our only chance for survival. It will be published this September and available for pre-order during today's call. And with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Snyder to Democrats Abroad.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be with all of you. One of my themes is going to be unpredictability and how important human action can be at certain moments, like the moment we are in right now. So it was, I didn't realize you were going to mention the testimony to Congress. So I'm just going to start with an anecdote about that. I was walking down the street with my pretty unpredictable 14-year-old, and he said, this is yesterday, he said, "Dad," I said, "What?" He said, "Whenever I feel down, I just think about you owning Marjorie Taylor Greene on the floor of the House of Representatives." And I thought, well, that's nice. That's really good. I want to start with this. I want to start with this notion that we're at a tipping point where the things that we do right now in these next 99 days, let's say, can be very, very decisive. This is going to be a historical point, but it's also going to be a point about human action and human choice. I'm going to start by saying where I think the tipping points are, why this moment is so critical. Then I'll say a word about the topic I was asked to speak about, which is authoritarianism in America and the risks that we're facing at present. And then I'm going to close with a word about what we can do and how we can turn things around. Because I was on this call last night, again, just chancy things. I was on this call last night for white dudes for Harris, and Tim Walz was saying, how often do you get a chance in 100 days to change the world? And I think that's not only the right spirit, I think it's actually historically quite a wise thing to say. So starting with the tipping points, the big tipping points, like the big things which are underneath us and which can go either way. For me, number one is climate. If we don't get a handle on this in the next few years, no one will ever be able to get a handle on climate. In that sense, voting red is voting for a burning planet. Voting blue is a chance for it's a chance for something calm. It's a chance for something cooler. The second big tipping point for me is the internet and social media and human intelligence and human sociability, where we're moving more and more towards being a people, and I'm talking about Americans now, who are absorbed in screens, have difficulty interacting one with the other, and therefore have trouble taking part in politics as we understand democratic politics. And then a third tipping point for me, which is worldwide, but also very specific to us, is wealth concentration. For 2,500 years, the smartest people writing about democracy have made the point that if you allow too much wealth to be concentrated in too few hands, you're not going to be able to maintain a democracy, because those people will have too much voice, because those people will be able to collect clients around them who won't care about the overall democratic system. And so when we talk about the crisis of democracy, and people have different analyses, but I would say these three underlying trends are the things which drive the problems that we have. Sure, there's bad behavior. Sure, there's a particularly bad person running for office, but we have these underlying problems which make democracy harder, and which democracy is the only way to fix. Now, there's also a way, of course, in which America itself is a tipping point for other countries. So I'm talking to a group now which naturally thinks about the relationship between the US and other countries. I'm only going to say this in a very general way, but the US is obviously a key democracy. What happens in our country enables things in other countries. What our leaders do gives permission for other leaders to do things. We face a political a candidate for office for the office of president, Donald Trump, who is a kind of pure transactionalist and who would fit very well into a world of transactionalism led by, I would say, Xi and Putin, where he happily plays a kind of third fiddle. And our role is also critical. That is, where we go, we'll tip things one way or another with respect to Ukraine. And those who have heard me on other subjects, and I'm happy to talk about this at greater length in the Q&A if need be, but I think the way the war in Ukraine goes is also crucial for how democracy and the rule of law and a lot of other things go around the world. So those for me are the overall tipping points. Those are the things which, if we don't get a handle on them in the next 1 to 5 years, are going to go very wrong and make democracy difficult to unthinkable. But as I say, and I'll return to this at the end, I think democracy is also the only way to get ourselves on the right side of those tipping points. So the thing I was asked to speak about was authoritarianism in America. And in a way, this is kind of an odd subject for me, because I feel like I'm now playing on a team. For a while, I felt like I didn't have that many friends or colleagues or people around me who were saying the kinds of things that I was saying in 2016. And now I feel like the things that I have said, a number of the things that I predicted then happened. And I feel like we've got a much larger team, a great team of authoritarianism experts and lawyers, and above all, activists who are aware that our politics isn't just about choosing flavors, but it's about choosing regime types, and that the type of regime that we're in can change. So I won't rehearse all the things that I've talked about previously. I'm happy to talk about On Tyranny and Road to Unfreedom in the Q&A. I'll just give you a very brief sense of where I think we are right now. So in terms of an authoritarian regime change, we have in place what you might think of as the 6 Ps. There's a party, there's a person, there's a precedent, there's a projection, there's preparation, there's a program. So we have a party, the Republican Party, which has been largely captured by people who no longer believe that voting should really decide the outcome it's been largely captured by a person who wishes for it to be a cult of personality. That's the second factor. There is a person. There very clearly is a single person who would like to be not just a leader of a party or the leader of the executive branch, but a leader with a capital L. The person who directly, as the fascist logic goes, directly represents the people without institutions, without laws, whose deeds and words are simply supposed to be emanations of the popular will. So we have the party, we have the person, we also have the precedent, and this is very important. We've had an attempted coup attempt. We've had an attempted coup. We've had an attempt to bring down our constitutional way of doing politics in January of 2021. The main thing that a failed coup predicts is a successful coup. What it predicts with even more accuracy is an attempt at a second coup. When I was talking in 2020 about how Trump was going to try to stay in power regardless of what the election results were, there were not that many people with me. I think 4 years later, it would be a little bit strange not to expect that, given that he's done it once, and given he's sending exactly the same signals again. The projection is, of course, the big lie. The projection is the idea that we cheat, therefore it's okay for him to cheat. The projection is that he really won last time, it was taken away from him, therefore everything that he does this time around is somehow justified. The preparation, which wasn't there last time to the same extent anyway, is the Supreme Court, and in particular, the immunity ruling. I think the Supreme Court, like some other factors, can go either way depending upon atmosphere, depending on how we behave. But certainly the Supreme Court has prepared the way for a president to do things which he wouldn't have necessarily been prepared to do 4 years ago. And finally, and again, this is new compared to 4 years ago, is the program. The only thing which is really protecting Project 2025 from scrutiny is the fact that we're not a nation that happily reads things that are 900 pages long. But in general, the more people know about it, the more we realize this is a program for a change, not only in mentality and behavior, but also in regime type. So in addition to those, those 6 Ps, the party, the person, the precedent, the projection, the preparation, the program, we also have this phenomenon. So I guess I will refer very briefly to On Tyranny. Chapter 1 of On Tyranny, the first lesson in my little political pamphlet On Tyranny, which I wrote when Trump won in 2016, was don't obey in advance. And one thing which is concerning this time around, especially in the media, is that there is a great deal of obeying in advance. There is a great deal of anticipating how Trump might treat us if he wins. And of course, if you do that, if you allow fear to dictate how, for example, you cover a presidential debate or how you cover a party convention, then you're not only doing something which is morally wrong, you're doing something which is politically significant, because you're making the victory of the person who makes you afraid more likely. And I mean, this is a point that I think is really important, that like we shouldn't normalize normalizing. We shouldn't both sidesing. Like if the press is both sidesing, they're preparing us for regime change. If you treat someone who wants to change the whole system as in some way on the same page as someone who just wants more healthcare, you're not following any kind of rule of objectivity. You're behaving in a way which is changing the world. And I note that because of course I'm against it, but also because for me it's a symptom of things that are going the wrong way. The micro scenario for how things will go wrong in November, and I'm sure many of you have thought about this as well as I have, or probably even more detail. But the micro scenario this time around concerns not so much January as November. They certainly have plans for January, but I think they know they're going to lose in November. And beyond that, Trump has never really campaigned to win. I think this time around he thought he was going to win against Joe Biden. I personally never thought that, but I think he was convinced he was going to win against Joe Biden. He's never really been somebody who's campaigned to win, and he's never really been somebody who expected to win. He didn't expect to win in 2016. He was surprised. In 2020, as we know, he knew he lost, but nevertheless, what he was trying to do was to get close enough to carry out some kind of shenanigans, which he then did, right? He did get close enough. He was within, whatever it was, 7 million votes. He was vaguely close enough that he could claim somehow that he had been close. So my idea is that he's not really campaigning to win. He's campaigning just to get close enough to do something else. And this, by the way, I mean, not that it matters to Democrats, but it matters to Americans who are considering voting for Trump. Like, a vote for Trump it's not a vote for a candidate who's trying to take office by way of an electoral process. A vote for Trump is essentially a pat on the back for somebody who's planning to carry out regime change, regardless of the outcome. You're pushing in the direction not of a person in a process. If you vote for Trump, you're pushing in the direction of a regime change by somebody who's not taking the procedure seriously at all. And then, of course, the person is in a very special predicament, and it is a predicament that students of authoritarianism are very familiar with. Trump has one interest, and that is dying in bed in the White House. That's it. He wants to die in bed in the White House. There's no other meaningful interest. He doesn't want to go to prison. He wants to be sure he's not going to go to prison. If possible, he'd like to make some money before he dies. It's clear that that'd be nice for him. He's never really succeeded in that. But the main thing is he needs to die in bed. That's where dictatorial policies eventually drive everybody who follows them. They're afraid of going to prison. They're afraid of being poor. They're afraid of being friendless. What they want to do is they want to die in bed in the White House. That's it. There's nothing else that matters to Trump at this point, which means that he will do whatever comes to his head to try to gain power. It also means, of course, that if he does gain power, he's not going to leave it because he needs to stay in the White House. So, are they thinking of some kind of some kind of power seizure in November? Obviously, they are. Obviously, they are. Will they try it? This is the thing that's the variable. This depends on other people. It depends on whether they believe that the executive branch now, the Biden administration now, is paying attention and is preparing executive action for this scenario. If they think the president is preparing for this, they're going to be much less likely to try it. If they think the president is idle and the Department of Justice is idle, if the Department of Justice, and I have no special information, I'm just laying it out the way I see it. If the Department of Justice is idle or not preparing for these scenarios, they're making the scenarios much more likely. Do they think anyone is watching? How much press coverage have there been of pro-Trump, or rather pro-coup people with a record of being in favor of the past coup attempt? How much press coverage is there of them at the state level, at the county level, at the precinct level? Are there lists of these people? Are we attending to them? If they know they're being watched, it's much less likely that they will actually try to do something. And then the other factor, of course, is, do people think that it is close, or do people think it will be close? And of course, that's something that we can do something about. In fact, a lot of these things we can do something about. The Justice Department and the Biden administration, maybe less so. The media covering it, maybe a bit more so. The election being close is something that we can all do something about. And I'm afraid we are in a situation where it's not just about getting over the top and winning. It's about winning in a thumping, decisive way, so that they know that they are going to lose, but also they know that they're losing in a way where if they try to do things, they're just going to look stupid. So from my point of view, I mean, from the point of view of somebody who works on some of the darker moments of the 20th century, somebody who works on contemporary Russia, from my point of view, I basically see all this as really good news. I believe that we are actually, I mean, historically speaking, we are in a very good situation, given that this person is still running for office. We're in a situation where 98 days of activism, of phone banking, of knocking on doors, of donations and voting can stop it. We are still at the very privileged stage of preventing fascism, where an election can do the trick. An election can do the trick. It may be the last time that's true, but it's certainly true this time. And it's not just a matter, as I say, of winning the election. It's a matter of making it seem unreal that Trump would try to cheat. It's a matter of making it seem like it's out of reach. It's a matter of people knowing that Ohio is in play, that Florida is in play, that Texas is in play. It's a matter of people knowing that it's not really that close. It's a matter of, to put it very directly, it's a matter of demoralizing the other side with moral behavior. It's a matter of getting out the vote. It's a matter of creating expectations that things are going to go a certain way. And so we can prevent, we can work in the right direction. And this is where I'm going to close. This is the way that history works, right? So this is a very short talk. I can be much more long and boring. But history works in such a way that there are these big forces in the background. And there are these moments, these conjunctures where things can tip one way or the other. And it's very often going to be the personal action, choices, commitments, moral commitments, political action based on moral commitments, which decides how things can break. And things can break either way. It's a three-dimensional tipping point. Like we're at the top of the mountain, things can roll down one side, but they can also roll down the other side, and we're in a situation where how we nudge things, how we nudge that boulder at the top of the mountain is going to determine which way it rolls. Is it going to roll one way or the other? The status quo isn't going to continue. Things are going to get much worse, or they're going to get much better. They're going to break one way or the other. And this is partly a matter, like seeing this is partly a matter of seeing previous mistakes. It's partly a matter of taking charge of your own mood, right? Like I think we've learned that that this thing that I've called several times the politics of inevitability isn't true. Like it's just not the case that a good economy is going to bring good politics. It's just not the case that America is automatically going to be a democracy. I think we've learned that's not true. I think we've learned not to make the mistake of exceptionalism, to believe that just because we're Americans, things will somehow always turn out, or just because our institutions are American, they will somehow automatically protect us. These things aren't true. I think we're learning also that the other side's story of exceptionalism is not true. It's not true that they are the real Americans. It's not true that the more patriotic people are on their side. It's not true that they can bully the rest of us into thinking that America has to be that way. There's an internet element to this as well. It's very easy to think, if you pay too much attention to Twitter or if you spend too much time online in general, that things are all going very dark, right? Because that's the way the algorithms are set up. That's the mood you're supposed to be in. It's very easy to go that way, but the internet is much darker than the real world. Twitter in particular is much darker than the real world. There's a myth which has largely come out of the internet, which is that like the far right is dominating, that it has to win. But that's not what's been happening. The far right just lost in Poland. The far right just lost in United Kingdom. The far right just lost in France, right? There's no reason to think that that's actually the trend. So this is where I want to land, that we're in this situation where we can turn things, right? Where President Biden's actions in particular, which are, I think, in human terms, magnificent, and in moral terms, extraordinary, but also in political terms, very strategic, that his decision has allowed us to be at the top of this mountain where we can actually push the boulder, where it's given us this chance in the form of a stunningly talented and in a way unexpected candidate who has allowed people to suddenly see a future and to make connections with one another. I think we're now in a position where, kind of going in reverse the way I went through before, we're in a position where we can make sure we're not going to see Trump again. We're in a position where we can make it much less likely that there will be an authoritarian America. We're in a position where we can get at least some traction on these underlying trends by way of the right outcome, the right outcome in a democratic election. So tipping points are also turning points, and they're turning points on issues, but they're also turning points on how we feel about things. And here, I'm personally really glad that the Harris campaign has chosen freedom as their main slogan, at least thus far, because I think that freedom, in American English has been massacred. We've used freedom to mean everything from conformism to violence to doing nothing to submission to corporations. But I think it is the key American political word, and rightly so. I think what the campaign is fastened on is something like, is the right notion of freedom, that freedom is about possibility, that freedom is about enabling ourselves to do things. And it's in particular about enabling ourselves to do things in a future. It's about seeing a future where you can get some traction on what we know are the big problems, but also a future where things open up, sometimes unexpectedly, where we see that there are things that we could do that we didn't realize that we could have done. And when I say that, I think I'm capturing something of a mood which really is present, but I think I'm also describing a reality. I think that we are at a point where it's not just a vibe, it's actually a historically existing possibility that we can seize. So that's what I wanted to say, and I wanted to make sure that we had some time to go back and forth, and so that I could hear from you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Oh, we have a lot of questions in the Q&A box, and they all have a certain theme to them. But I'm going to ask a quick question from someone who wrote in early. When Trump loses the election, looking at the historical models, where do you see MAGA going from here? Is it dependent on the charisma of one strong man, and so it ends up splintered and returning quickly to the conservative movement, or will they coalesce around a new figure?
I think it's very important. I'm going to use the word fascist now. Like, it's very important for a fascist to lose in a way that it's clear that they've lost. And that doesn't just mean losing a vote count, because that doesn't mean that much to them. It's very important that they see that they can't seize the levers of power, that they don't have a movement behind them, that a lot of people think they're sort of ridiculous. And this happens, right? That fascists do lose. It's sometimes hard, like in the Second World War, it's easy to see how they lost, but they also can lose in other ways, right? They can lose credibility, they can lose support, they can lose generationally. And with Trump, I think one of the opportunities that we have now is to do ourselves and our children and the world a favor by making sure he gets a real thumping, not just electorally, but also that he is seen for what he is, and that he's excluded not just from some notion of what rational politics is, but that his form of politics can be described as something which is not only not acceptable, but which can't bring you to power. Like so we have a kind of double duty here. We have to win in that broad sense as well. Trump has really harmed the Republican Party by way of his stochastic violence. So that party is now in the situation of it's funny that they criticize communism so much, because a lot of the things they do are really, I'm a historian of communism. Like, a lot of the things they really do are reminiscent of that period. So by making party membership and prestige connected to a single person and that person's whims, and by connecting it to threats of violence from that person, what they've done is driven out all their best people, and they've deterred good younger people from joining their party, which means that in that slot where we now see all these terrific, talented people kind of orbiting around the vice president in the Veep stakes, they don't have that. They don't have those good people. They don't have the successors to a Trump who would take the party in a different way, because those people have largely been driven out or intimidated, or they've been slandered to such an extent that it's hard to imagine them coming back. So I think the Republican Party will renew itself in some form, and I think the real question is like where MAGA goes. And I think that there will be a Republican Party, but I think the party has to build itself back up as a party as opposed to a personality cult, and that's probably a matter of 2 or 3 or 4 presidential elections. With with the MAGA people, what you see is that when their guy loses, they will then say, we never really believed in that. Because it's not about reason. It's ultimately about a sense of power. It's about a certain kind of charisma. And because it's all charisma, I mean, charisma is a good thing. You want to have, our candidate has charisma, that's great. But because it's all charisma, it's like an empty plastic bag. It's like a plastic bag full of air, right? Like at some moment, it's just gone. And then like they immediately jump from adjusting to everything that he said to saying, oh, well, I never really believed that in the first place.
All right, we have a lot of questions on this theme also. Please comment on the Republican candidate's statement, meaning Trump, there's no need to vote or you won't have to vote again. And Rachel Maddow has reported that there are numerous election deniers occupying official election posts. How likely is it that we can circumvent this or keep them from undermining the election?
I think that's the way to put it. Like it's not, the question is not whether it's not like a laboratory situation where we just wait to see what happens. It's a political situation in which our actions are going to determine whether it happens. So if we know that they're going to try this, that they're thinking about it, then we make it much less likely by paying attention. So it's no longer a question of being upset by their taboo breaking. They broke a lot of taboos the last time around. It's more a question of just taking for granted that they will, if they can, and thinking about what legally you can do, and Ian Basson and Mark Elias and other people have terrific legal groups which are focusing on this, thinking about what they can do, letting them know we know what they might do, and being on top of it. I think that makes it less likely. But also, I mean, just trying to win by a lot makes it less likely, because people who are going to commit these sorts of crimes are much less likely to do it if they think they're going to lose the election anyway, right? Like if you think you're going to win, then your guy's going to pardon you and it doesn't matter. But how many people really want to serve, that prison time for this cause if they're going to lose? And so you want to set up the situation. There's just one more reason why you want to make them understand that there's a very good chance that they're going to be losing this election.
The Harris campaign a few days ago announced that they were switching from using more abstract democracy versus autocracy theme against Trump and Vance to using the weird factor against them. Do you think this will be more effective and a more effective way to highlight the Democratic stakes, e.g. highlight that Republicans are weird, have weird ideas about women and rights, and you won't have to vote anymore?
So I think if there was an official announcement about weird, I think that's pretty funny in and of itself. You would have like, our position is we're going to call them weird. So I'm going to start in a different way. When the president decided that he wasn't going to run for office, he set in course a series of events which led to a much more interesting and freewheeling conversation among people on our side. One element of that is the vice president herself. Another element is the people who are now paying attention to, who are circling around the vice president as she considers who her vice presidential nominee will be. And the weird thing, unless I'm missing something here, largely comes from the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, who's a figure that a lot of folks hadn't paid attention to until about, I don't know, 3 days ago. But I think he's the one who's pushed the weird. And I just want to say that I think he's saying that because he believes it. I think he's on to something, not just politically, but in human terms, that a lot of the stuff which keeps them going, which lights their fire, like the stuff which keeps them up late at night, is weird. Like it's creepy. It's about controlling other people. It's stuff which is only slightly political and which is mostly about controlling other humans. And so I would put it that way. Like I don't like, it's weird to have I'd say it's weird to have a memo about the weird, but I think that the vice president is right that her policy positions are much closer to the American median than the policy positions of Project 2025. or Trump in person insofar as you can sort them out, or Vance in person. Although what's funny about Vance is that his main position is that government can't do anything except like police your uterus. Like that's it. Aside from that, government's a total failure. So I think like one side of it is that I want to say that the weird, like they may have seized on it now, but like it came out organically and that's good. The other side of this is that I don't think they're swapping democracy for weird. I think they're swapping democracy for freedom. And I think that's right, because democracy is like, I'm in favor of democracy, but being in favor of democracy means, as I see it, a better America, right? Like what we have now is a democracy which needs a lot of work, but I would like to have a more democratic system. But when people hear democracy, they sometimes think, well, democracy is what we already have, and like, look, it's not so great, and look, the oligarchs and so on and so forth. Whereas freedom, I think, is that's, I think, the high ground to be seized, because pretty much everybody thinks that freedom is a good thing. And I think it handles it brings together the policies with the vision. Because when she says in her ads that if you have healthcare, you're more free, she's right. When she says if your kids are less afraid at school, they're more free, she's right. And so you're uniting policies with a view of like a future in which people have less to worry about and have more possibilities. So I think it's more that they're swapping democracy for freedom, and I think that's a good call.
All right, we have a few questions on this theme also. About the mainstream media preparing us for regime change, and that some people feel like the outlets, and well, I mean, not feel like, it was true, they normalized Trump and even authoritarian tendencies in the United States. How do we overcome this besides just canceling our subscriptions or writing letters to the editor?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, writing letters to the editor is not a bad idea, not to the Times or the Post, but like if to your local newspapers, because they get published and people look at them, and that actually does at least change the tone of discussion in smaller communities sometimes. I think it's a matter of, so I'm not a big like subscription canceller either. I think that you can kind of get on a roll where you're like, okay, today I'm not going to watch MSNBC, and tomorrow CNN, and then I'm going to cancel the Times, then I'm going to cancel the Post. And then maybe at the end of that progression, you're just perhaps spending too much time staring at Twitter or whatever. So I would say like subscribe to The Week, subscribe to The Guardian Weekly. Make sure you're subscribing to something which is good and which gives you actual reporting. And then when you're online, follow the investigative reporters, like the Jane Myers, like the people who are out there writing long form things, who are going to figure out some of these questions. Follow them. Online, follow people like Bellingcat, like people who are doing actual investigative work. Get on their side, fund them, because what you don't want to do to yourself is say, okay, the media is all sour, and so now I'm gonna, because then you end up being kind of a victim of your own emotions, and then you may fall into a rut, online. So there's that, and then I think also just recognizing that these they're not going to the New York Times is actually not going to decide this election. They're doing like I think in their editorial policy, they've had some good editorials too, and they've had some great investigative reporting, and they've done some really good, like they're foreign reporters. Some of them are just absolutely magnificent, but in their editorial line, like, and in their headline writing, which is unfortunately kind of an art about getting clicks, they really do normalize and go back and forth. And that really does, and I just want them to understand this, that really does prepare the way for fascism, because what they're doing is they're scolding us from a position of moral relativism. Like they're scolding us for not being morally relativist enough. They're scolding us for not seeing how Biden and Trump were basically the same, and Biden's age was basically the same as Trump's fascism. And when they get themselves committed to that kind of scolding from a position of moral relativism, they're actually doing the work of fascism, because they're like in the service of what they think is objectivity. They're making it normal, right? They're making it like like fascism is just a matter of, it's just the same as how old you are, what clothes you wear. It's one political preference like others. So, I mean, one can try to change them, and I think a lot of us are trying to make this argument. But I think the main thing is to keep yourself informed and not to be demoralized, because MSNBC is not going to decide this election. CNN is not going to decide this election. The Times is not going to decide this election. What's going to decide this election is people knocking on doors and phone banking, and people getting on calls like this and like making one another feel like we can all do it. That's what's going to decide the election. The other thing I wanted to say is Philadelphia Inquirer. I think they've been rocking it, and like if like somebody could, like their national newspaper too, they had great coverage of the Republican National Convention. Subscribe to them, throw them a subscription. I'm giving really long answers, so I hope these questions are representative.
Yeah, they are. Let's talk about the tech industry for a moment. I have a question. Will the tech industry increasingly sponsor totalitarianism? I think you have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was, for those of you who know my book, Road to Unfreedom, that was partially a book about techno-fascism and about the way that the development of social media coincided with and enabled the rise of Putin and Trump, and also enabled the connection between Putinism and Trumpism. Things have not gotten better since then. We're still in a world where on Facebook lies are going to garner more attention than truth. And Twitter has really changed, obviously. Twitter back in 2016 was, relatively speaking, one of the good guys. They did have a serious ethics team, whereas now they have now they have like one guy who wears satanic gear, telling us about how Christians are offended. And literally like personally censoring people and personally censoring accounts, and also quite literally favoring Russian propaganda and Trumpist propaganda, and actively or not also favoring anti-climate change propaganda. And I think like there are two factors here. One is the oligarchy part, that it's ridiculous that any one person would have control of this much of the information space. Like if you could reel back to 2000 or even 2010 and say, okay, here's the way the internet's going to develop. It's going to develop so that one person is going to be in charge of this much information space. I think we would all say, wow, that's ridiculous, but we got to make sure that doesn't happen. But we're here. So part of it is the oligarchy, but part of it is also the algorithms, that they act to make you think the stuff you've already thought, and they act to make you angry at the other person, and they act to keep you online. And so I've written some things about this. I do think that the behaviorist algorithms on which the advertisement-driven model of social media is based, I do think drive us as human beings towards fascism. I think it's one of the underlying factors. And I think it's one of the things like climate change, one of the deep things that we're going to have to use the state to change after November. And it can be done. The Europeans do a much better job of this than the Americans so far. But in the meantime, of course, one has to be very careful about what one does on the media, right? Like we were using it, we're using it right now. And so for me, the question is always, are we using it to help other people do things off the screen? And if we are, then we're doing the right thing. If we're using it in a way which just keeps us on the screen, then maybe we have a problem. So we're kind of at two stages now. Like I was on the white dudes for Harris call last night, and like that was on a screen, but it was 190,000 guys, and they raised a ton of money, and they made each other feel better. And I think they did something politically and socially very significant, morally very significant, by carefully using this as a way to make us more human. So we have to between now and November, or between now and the Harris presidency, we have to use these tools in the right way, to make sure we're helping other people feel better and be more active. And then in the long term, we have to seriously think about how we're going to reform this. Jen kindly mentioned my next book, which is On Freedom. There's a whole chapter in On Freedom about how this works and about how to turn it around.
How do third-party candidates figure into this election? Are they spoilers? Are they serious? Or are they just pawns of the of the totalitarians.
I mean, this is something I have no data on this that the rest of you won't have. I think on the face of it, it's completely obvious that the third party candidate or candidates, but there's one who's more important than the others. The third party candidate is there to help Trump win. I mean, I think that may not be how it's turning out, but they seem to have the same sponsor. I do think that, I mean, I don't know who needs to hear this, but we're not just in a situation where the costs are really great if you vote for a third party candidate. We're also in a situation where you're going to lose the opportunity to do a lot of those things that you think are alternative if you vote for third. Like the Harris candidacy is a chance for us to break through a lot of the things that have been holding us back. And that's the kind of thing that, like, that's why people vote for third parties. And I get that. I mean, I get that the system can feel encrusted, and I get that it can feel like we don't have enough alternatives. I believe that myself. But getting Harris into the Oval Office will loosen things up. It will make things possible. Like, if you have that kind of energy that you want the system to change in the right way, like this is kind of your chance. So it's not like the rap, and it's correct, is if you vote for a third party candidate, you're going to be helping Trump get into office. But it's also, you're going to be taking away from yourself a chance for a transformation, because we're lucky, right? Like, it's this, we're at the top of the mountain. It can go either way, We're lucky that we have a chance to have a transformational election with a transformational candidate. We shouldn't toss that away.
Since, well, for the past, I don't know, really for the past 14 years, the Supreme Court has been chipping away at our rule of law and our rights. Let me see. Can you just talk about the rule of law, and is America's rule of law hanging by a thread?
Yeah. We're at this really existential moment with the rule of law, I feel, because on the one side, we have people, MAGA people, I mean, who are talking about violence directed towards people of color, directed towards the people they regard as their enemies, in a way which is more than concerning. And violence is the opposite of the rule of law. The reason why we have the rule of law is so that we can regulate disputes and differences without resort to the threat or use of violence. That's it. Like, that's the point of the rule of law. That's the magic of it. Because if you can get violence behind you, and I realize this is not America today, right? But if you can get violence behind you, then you enable all kinds of other fruitful human interactions, and you enable completely different kind of politics. And then, so the one problem is that, and then the other problem is the Supreme Court. And in particular, I mean, as I see it, they're just making it up. I think that's the main problem. They're making it up. I'm willing to believe there are people out there who seriously believe that originalism is an idea. I personally think it's completely without merit, but I'm willing to believe there are people out there who think originalism is a concept. I'm willing to believe there are people who are serious historical traditionalists, textualists, sorry. I know there are such people, but those conceptual commitments just can't really be squared with the, I mean, kind of ridiculous language that one now finds in Supreme Court rulings, which, I mean, they don't seem to be taking us very seriously, honestly. They don't seem to be even really trying to make us believe that these rulings are based upon some serious intellectual or moral commitment. So that's the other part of the crisis, right? Like, I would like to believe in the Supreme Court. I do believe in the division of powers. I would like to believe that the Supreme Court is serving its function, but at the moment, it's really not. For whatever reason, it's ideologically overpacked in one direction. People sit there for too long. There's too much impunity. People are bribed, which is ridiculous. I mean, when I look at the ProPublica, by the way, or ProPublica, they're the ones who published a lot of these early stories about Clarence Thomas. Like, that's another example of investigative reporting that you can support and stay close to, ProPublica. But the stuff that Clarence Thomas does, like, it's the kind of thing which happened in the former Soviet Union in the 1990s. It's the kind of thing that we were all over criticizing. We wanted, we were lecturing folks about how this is definitely not how the Supreme Court is supposed to behave. And so funnily enough, then you get to a situation where those people in those formerly communist countries, not all of them, but many of them are looking at us and they're saying, wow, it's really quite bizarre that you just have oligarchs, basically taking Supreme Court justices as pets. That's weird. So those are the two problems. And so the rule of law then becomes an ideal, right? Like it then becomes, you then have to say, we're going to be the ones who stay with the procedures and we're going to win big. And we're not afraid, right? Like we're not afraid. You can threaten us, but we're not afraid. We're going to vote anyway. We're going to stand in line. We're going to knock on doors. We're going to make phone calls. We're not afraid. We're going to do the thing. Everyone's going to do the thing that she can do, right? And then the other thing is we have the ideal of the rule of law. We still believe in constitutionalism. We don't think it's a joke because that's the danger. That's the way things turn in the 21st century. And you see it in Hungary, you see it in Russia, where like they stay with the procedures, they keep having elections, they say everything they're doing is constitutional, but at some point it's such a joke that everyone knows it's a joke, right? And then everyone has to take part in the joke, and taking part in the joke is the thing which demoralizes you. And that's the way we're going now, unfortunately. So you have to say, okay, we have a rule of law, we have an improvable constitution, we have an ideal which goes beyond the individual rulings and individual justices, and we believe in that.
We've got a lot of questions about messaging. Are there any types of words, phrases, anything we can use to motivate moderates and independents to take the loss of democracy seriously?
Well, so I'm going to answer that directly, but one thing I think the Harris people are right about is to try to both acknowledge the concern, but to emphasize that things can be much better. And this is tricky, like, because it involves a pivot, but losing democracy would be horrible. But it's also the case that we're in a moment where we can confirm democracy and get out on the other side and have lots of things that we don't have now. And I tend to think that for a lot of uncommitted folks, it's getting stuff that they don't have now, which is going to be more persuasive, because unfortunately, a lot of people can't really imagine what it would mean. And it kind of depends on how you're positioned, right? If you're not a citizen, or if you're from a family where a lot of people have been incarcerated, it's easier to imagine some things, right? It depends on where you're situated in the society. But in general, there are a lot of folks who just can't really imagine what a strongman regime would be like in the US. And so for them, I think for a lot of folks, it is better to stay on this. It could be a lot better, right? But to answer the question directly, I think you can't just say democracy and the lack of democracy. You have to say things like, you want to pay bribes to get your kids into public school. You want everything to depend on who knows who, right? Because the lack of democracy is the presence of corruption. Do you want to be in a world where everyone's denouncing everybody else? You want to be in a world where you have to be here's a good one. You want to be in a world where you have to worry about your kids all the time, because that's where authoritarianism actually grips people. It's the kids. That's where it does its work. That's people stay in line because they're afraid for their kids. They're afraid that their kid will get kicked out of school. They're afraid their kid won't be able to go to college. They're afraid their kid will lose their job. And they're right. That's how it works in Russia. You step out of line, your kid's not going to college. And that's the kind of thing which we all, like, everybody sort of takes for granted. Like, okay, my kid's going to get into school. Like, my kid's going to be able to become a carpenter. Nope. Like, the moment you're in an authoritarian regime and your kid does something, you could do something too, right? If you do anything, or even if you don't, your neighbor says you did something, right? Your neighbor says you did something, and then your kid gets thrown out of school and never gets to come back. But also, maybe your kid does something. Your kid protests, or maybe somebody says your kid did something. Your kid gets thrown out of school. doesn't have the future that he or she expected. That's the way it works. And I think you kind of, if we're in these conversations, we have to break it down like that. You know, these are the things that you're going to lose, and be very human and specific about it, because I don't think democracy loss of democracy. I think, let me put it this way, like I've been walking that path for a pretty long time now. And I think most of the folks who get it at that level have already gotten it. And so I appreciate the question, because I think it's about translating that language into something else for the folks who haven't already gotten it. Because I think anybody who's going to react to democracy, lack of democracy, is pretty much already on the team.
All right. Jen, do you want to close out with the last question?
Yeah, thanks. And Tim, thanks. This sort of touches on a lot of the points you've already talked about, but I just want to sort of leave this in a positive thing with all of the activists and people that we've got on the call. So during your talk at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna a few weeks ago, you posed the question, what can we do to create a more reasonable present, excuse me. I find this very positive and forward-looking inquiry. And with Vice President Kamala Harris now at the top of the Democratic ticket, which, as you mentioned, is a very forward-looking campaign, what do you think the activists and volunteers on this call need and should do to help push forward for a more reasonable present and make sure it actually comes into reality, into play?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what's normal is dynamism, you know, like it's normal to be dynamic. This is one thing which is so great about her. Like it's normal to be moving around. It's normal to be smiling. It's normal to be dancing. It's normal to be making connections with other people. Like we're the normal ones because that's what we're doing. Like that's what activism should be about. It's not normal to be trying to scare all the men with sexual anxiety. It's not normal to be trying to intimidate the women. It's not normally trying to scare the folks of color. Like that's not normal. What's normal is going out and thinking, hey, we can win this thing and it's going to make the world a lot better. And I gotta like, I feel that, like in the people whom I know who are at work in various ways, I feel them loosening up, and I feel connections being made that weren't being made before. I feel a mood changing, and the mood is connected to action. The action is connected to mood. Like as soon as like the ice starts to break and we all start to get out there and do our thing, there'll be all these positive reinforcements. Like when we do things, we'll feel stronger. When we're stronger, we're gonna do things. And I think that's already happened. I think we are. I mean, I think there's been a kind of, like, it's one thing to describe the big trends, which I tried to do, and it's another thing to describe the structure of the problem with Trump, which I tried to do. And then you need another language to describe the sense of possibility, right? Because it's the possibility is about the things we didn't know we could do. And I think it's really true for a lot of Americans, activists and not activists, that the world seems more open now than it did 8 days ago, 9 days ago. It seems more open, like not just open to winning, but open to getting things done. So, I mean, as far as like, I think we need to stay, like we need to be happy. We need to be happy. Like we've had some good luck. We've had a lot of bad luck. We've now had some good luck. Like we should be happy about our good luck, and we should take advantage of our good luck. Take advantage of this candidate. Whoever she picks for vice president, that person is going to be super across many dimensions, because these are all good choices. And we should be happy that we can win and win big. And we should be happy that we're the ones who are unpredictable. You know, we're the ones who are saying new things. And some of those things, by the way, involve going on the offensive, which I think is right. You know, it's right to go on the offensive, not to be discourteous, not to use foul language, but it's right to go on the offensive. It's right to push them to the margins. It's right to claim not just the high ground, but the middle ground. It's right to claim all that ground. So, I mean, my message would be that, like, we have some things lining up for us now. The president did a magnificent thing. The vice president is a very special candidate. There's something good and lucky about having 100 days and not longer and not shorter. There's something good and lucky about still having Trump sentencing and the Democratic convention and the choice of the vice president, having all those things still in front of us. We're in a good place. And now it's a question of being warm and unpredictable and making connections, and being sure of ourselves and not being afraid, like not being afraid to win, not being afraid of good things happening, feeling the good things happen and pushing them forward. And so that's how I feel about this. That's how I honestly feel about it. I mean, I was somebody who thought Biden could win. And I was ready to do everything I could, like, to make sure that that happened. But I think that it's not just that he's been replaced by Harris. That's not what happened. It's the human action, right? Like, it's not staying in power is a really hard thing to do. Like, there are Shakespearean plays about this. There's political thought about this. The dictators are the ones who can't leave power. Like, that's them. And he not only had what I think is going to be regarded as a historically extremely successful term as president, I think what will be biographically regarded as an extremely interesting 50 plus years in public life, he also has now this decision, right? This human decision to leave power. And that's different than just like being replaced. Like, it's an action, and that action releases her in a very special way, because she now has behind her everything which their administration did. And also this sense that, like, rather than that just being the past, like, that's now the platform from which you jump into this future, which has all this possibility. So I think we've, like, partly by luck, partly by strategy, and partly because they just made some good policies, especially in the first 2 years, we find ourselves in a good position, and we got to just, we should exploit that. We should be creative within it. We should be assertive within it. We should take the high ground. We should take the middle ground. And we really shouldn't be afraid to win, because, winning, it's not just that we have to win to stop the bad things from happening. It's that when we do win, there are all sorts of good things that will follow from that. So that's how I'm seeing it right now.
Well, Professor Timothy Snyder, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope, I'm going to put his new book in the chat, comes out on September 17th, and I hope everyone reads it. It's going to be great. And of course, please, everyone, request your absentee ballot. Make sure that your friends and family abroad and at home are voting. Ballots come out on September 21st. But you can still get them afterwards. It doesn't stop then, but it's better if you do it early. And yeah, this has been a very enlightening and exciting conversation, thought-provoking. Also, if anybody needs help afterwards with your ballot, if you've had questions, please use the link in the chat to go to our volunteers who are standing by and waiting for questions or provide help. One last other thing, because this is really important too, everybody. If we want to get out the vote, we're going to need money for that. So if you could please consider donating to us so that we can buy digital ads and other things to help get out the vote, to get out the 6 million Americans who live abroad, to make sure they know, because there's still a lot of people out there that don't even know they can vote. So with that, thanks everyone for coming, and
Thank you, Tim.
we'll
Very
see you in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us.
So glad to do it.
Yes, thank you so much. You're one of my favorite authors.
Thanks for saying.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next one, which tentatively is scheduled for August 4th, where we talk about Project 2025. I know there were a lot of questions about that in the audience, but we'll have a webinar dedicated to that coming up shortly. All right, everybody. Good night. Ciao.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Angela. Thanks,
Bye.
Jen. Thanks, Timothy.